History is not just written in books. It is written in blood, fire, and the silence that follows great wars. In the heart of 8th century Europe, a storm was rising. A storm that would decide the fate of kingdoms and the direction of a continent. This is the story of one of the most debated battles in human history. The Battle of Poitiers. Also known as the Battle of Tours. To understand the battle, we must first travel back. Back to a time when Europe was not united. When it was divided into small kingdoms. Weak, scattered, and constantly at war with each other. The mighty Roman Empire had already fallen. And in its place rose fragile kingdoms known as the Franks, Visigoths, and Lombards. Among them, one power was beginning to rise above all others. The Franks. But they were not yet an empire. They were still struggling for stability. And at the center of their future stood one man. A leader who would later be known as the Hammer of Europe. Charles Martel. While Europe was divided, a powerful new empire was expanding rapidly in the south. From the deserts of Arabia, across North Africa, and into the Iberian Peninsula. A vast Islamic empire was spreading with unstoppable speed. The Umayyad Caliphate had become one of the largest empires in the world. Umayyad Caliphate. Their armies were highly disciplined, fast-moving, and driven by strong belief and unity. Within just a few decades, they had conquered Persia, Egypt, North Africa. And now, they crossed into Europe. Spain, known then as Hispania, fell under their control. The Visigothic kingdom collapsed almost completely. And from Spain, the next target was clear. Across the Pyrenees Mountains, lay the heart of Western Europe. The year was early 700s AD. Muslim forces crossed into what is now France. Cities began to fall. Villages were destroyed or surrendered. Fear spread across the land like wildfire. For many Europeans, it felt like the end of their world was near. Army after army failed to stop the advance. The invaders were not just warriors. They were organized, strategic, and fast. At their peak, they reached deep into Frankish territory. And no one seemed able to stop them. In the north, Charles Martel was watching carefully. He understood something others did not. This was not just a raid. This was an invasion. If left unchecked, it could reshape Europe forever. So he began preparing. Not with arrogance, but with calculation. He gathered soldiers from across Frankish lands. He trained them. He strengthened alliances. And most importantly, he chose the battlefield carefully. Because he knew one truth. Victory would not depend on numbers alone, but on strategy, terrain, and discipline. At the same time, the southern forces continued their push north. They were led by a skilled and experienced commander. Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi. He was respected, intelligent, and confident. Under his command, the army moved deep into Frankish lands. But there was a problem growing inside the army. Distance. The further they moved from their base in Iberia, the more stretched their supply lines became. And in war, distance is a silent enemy. Charles Martel chose the region carefully. Near the city of Poitiers, forests covered much of the land. The terrain was narrow in places, and difficult for large cavalry movements. This was not open desert warfare. This was controlled, tight European terrain. And that changed everything. Because the Southern Army relied heavily on speed and cavalry tactics. But here, speed could be limited. And formation mattered more than force. As both armies moved closer, the atmosphere became heavy. Villagers fled. Monasteries emptied. Even soldiers knew something massive was coming. Two worlds were about to collide. Not just two armies, but two civilizations. Two beliefs. Two visions of the future. One side fighting to expand its empire. The other fighting to defend its homeland. And neither side was ready to retreat. Reports began to reach both commanders. Enemy sighted. Movement detected. The distance between the two armies began to shrink. Day by day. Hour by hour. Until finally, they were close enough to feel each other's presence. The silence before battle is always the loudest moment in history. Soldiers sharpened their weapons. Prayers were made on both sides. Fathers held letters they would never send. And commanders stood in silence, knowing that once the battle begins, there is no turning back. The stage is now set. Two great forces. Two powerful leaders. One battlefield that will decide the future of Europe. But the real battle has not yet begun. In part 2, the armies will finally clash. And history will change forever. The silence did not last long. Because history never waits. It strikes. And when it strikes, everything changes. The two greatest forces of their time were now face to face. Standing on opposite sides of destiny. The land of Poitiers was no longer just a battlefield. It had become the center of the known world. At dawn, the fog still covered the fields. Both armies waited in silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Then suddenly, a signal. A shout. And the war began. The first clash was brutal. Swords collided with shields. Arrows cut through the mist. The sound of steel filled the air like thunder. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Charles Martel had prepared for this moment. Instead of rushing forward, he ordered his army into tight defensive formations. A wall of shields. A wall of discipline. A wall that refused to break. Wave after wave of attacks crashed against them. But the Franks held their ground. Blood soaked the earth beneath their feet. But they did not move. Not even a step. On the other side, the cavalry forces charged with speed and power. Horsemen moved like wind across the battlefield. They struck fast. Then retreated, then struck again. A deadly rhythm of war. But something was different here. The forested terrain slowed their movement. Their usual advantage was fading. Still, they fought with courage and determination under the command of Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi. He pushed his men forward again and again, trying to break the Frankish line. But the wall did not fall. Hours passed. Then days. The battle did not end. It only grew more intense. Casualties rose on both sides. The ground became heavy with dust and blood. But the Franks remained disciplined. And discipline, in war, is stronger than speed. The southern army began to feel pressure. Supply lines stretched thin. Fatigue spread. And confusion began to grow. On the battlefield, Abd al-Rahman rode among his soldiers. He tried to rally them. He tried to restore order. He was not just a commander. He was the heart of his army in that moment. But war is unpredictable. And fate does not warn before it strikes. As night approached, the battlefield became even more chaotic. Dust blocked vision. Shouts echoed in every direction. Small groups fought without clear lines. Friend and foe became hard to distinguish. In this chaos, a sudden moment changed everything. Abd al-Rahman was struck during the confusion of battle. The exact details vary in history. But what is certain is this. He fell on the battlefield. And with him, the structure of his army began to weaken. As darkness fell, the fighting slowed. Both armies pulled back slightly. Exhausted. Wounded. Breathing heavily under the cold night sky. But no one slept peacefully. Because everyone knew. The battle was not over. It would continue tomorrow. And tomorrow would decide everything. On both sides, soldiers prepared for the final day. Some prayed. Some wrote final thoughts. Some simply stared into the fire, thinking of home. The night was filled with uncertainty. Because when two great armies collide, victory is never guaranteed. Only survival. The battle has begun. Blood has been spilled. A great leader has fallen. And both armies now stand exhausted at the edge of destiny. But the final outcome has not yet been decided. In Part 3, the battle reaches its final climax. And history is rewritten forever. The night passed. But peace did not return. Because wars like this do not end with silence. They end with decision. And the decision of Poitiers was still waiting to be made. Two exhausted armies stood under a gray morning sky, preparing for what would become the final moment of the battle. A moment that would echo through centuries. As the sun rose over the battlefield, smoke still lingered in the air. The ground was torn apart. And the bodies of the fallen lay scattered across the fields. There was no celebration. Only exhaustion. Both sides knew one thing clearly. The next clash could decide everything. The fate of kingdoms. The future of empires. And the direction of Europe itself. Charles Martel understood something crucial. His army did not need to win by aggression. They only needed to survive longer than their enemy. So he reinforced his defensive formation once again. A solid wall. Unbreakable in appearance. Unmoving in discipline. He knew that time was now his strongest weapon. Not speed. Not numbers. But endurance. The remaining forces of the Southern Army gathered for one final charge. They were tired. But determined. They still believed they could break through. They still believed victory was possible. Even after losing their commander. Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi. The soldiers pushed forward. With courage. With desperation. And with the hope that one final strike could turn the battle. Then it happened. The final assault began. Horsemen rushed forward. Arrows filled the sky. Steel clashed violently across the field. The battlefield turned into pure chaos once again. But something had changed. The momentum was gone. The coordination was broken. The unity was fading. And slowly, the attack began to lose strength. The Frankish line held firm. Step by step. Wave after wave. They resisted everything. And for the attacking army, that resistance became unbearable. Fatigue turned into collapse. Confusion turned into retreat. And retreat turned into survival instinct. The once powerful advance was now breaking apart. As the day reached its peak, the southern forces began to pull back. Not as a unified army, but as scattered groups. The battlefield that once echoed with confidence now echoed with uncertainty. There was no clear victory shout. No grand final moment. Just a slow realization that the battle had been lost. By evening, the fighting finally stopped. The field of Poitiers became silent. Too silent. The Franks remained standing. But they were too exhausted to celebrate. And the southern army began retreating southward. Back toward Iberia. The campaign that once seemed unstoppable had finally ended. History would later remember this battle in many ways. Some called it the moment Europe was saved. Some called it a turning point of civilizations. Others debate its true long-term impact. But one fact remains clear. The Battle of Poitiers changed the balance of power in Western Europe. It strengthened the Frankish kingdom. And it marked a halt to northern expansion of the Umayyad forces into this region. Umayyad Caliphate continued to rule vast territories. But their advance into Western Europe slowed. Meanwhile, the Franks grew stronger. And from this rising power, Europe would later transform into new kingdoms and empires. The seeds of medieval Europe were shaped in this very conflict. The Battle of Poitiers was not just a clash of armies. It was a clash of eras. Of expansion and resistance. Of ambition and survival. And like all great battles, its meaning is still debated today. But its impact is undeniable. Because on those fields near Poitiers, history did not just witness war. It witnessed transformation. And so, the echoes of Poitiers faded into history. But its story still lives on. As a reminder, that even the greatest empires can be changed in a single moment of war.